Hello and welcome to another episode of the Jack Delaney in Under 10 Minutes podcast, a podcast designed to bring you maximum information in 10 minutes or less so you can get on your way to being Jack Delaney. Today we have the first tandem Jacks episode. We're going to be talking about a pretty prevalent concept in fitness industry, which is fatigue, right? Like the big bad wolf, which is fatigue. Obviously, guys, there's a lot of different definitions of fatigue, and we have only 10 minutes to cover our thoughts on it. If we need to do another episode, we will. But Jack, let's just start off what types of fatigue, when people say fatigue, what do they mean? Like, what are some definitions of fatigue?
So you can go more like acute fatigue, which is, for example, say you had a hard leg day, that next day or two, you're feeling the fatigue from that, lower energy, a lot of like heavy legs, so to speak. More that chronic fatigue would be something that's built up more over time, and it's multifaceted. Can be from overtraining, but also poor sleep, poor recovery, poor nutrition outside, and that in combination can lead to just a downfall, not only in your training, but many aspects of life there too.
Yeah, mood and just overall energy levels, right? Like that chronic fatigue. And so, I think a lot of people kind of fearmonger, make it seem like if you train a little bit too hard, you're going to hit like that chronic fatigue level. And realistically, this fatigue is tough because it's something you absolutely need to consider. Like the goal of a session is to stimulate, not annihilate, right? But at the same time, it's really unlikely that you're going to put yourself into a hole by even a few hard sets across 6, to even 8 exercises, right? People talk about something like central versus peripheral fatigue. Central being more like nervous system driven, right? The level of basically output to the tissues that alters the amount of motor unit recruitment from things that fast twitch muscle fibers. And then there's peripheral, which is more so like that local fatigue that comes from, some metabolite buildup and, EC coupling stuff along those lines. And we don't want to get too into the weeds with that stuff today, but just know there are different models of fatigue out there. And so we kind of want to go over just some big arguments of fatigue in the industry and give you our thoughts on them. So the first one, we know this one, coaches acting like even a few hard sets will lead to overtraining and this chronic and central fatigue. Jack, what are your thoughts on that?
I think the main driver for our goal is hypertrophy is mechanical intention. How do you get that? It's hard quality sets. And as we preach here, intention drives intensity, right? And that's going to that breaking point to failure without compromising technique on compound work for sure. I kind of got some YouTube videos in that elbow flare up on a bicep curl. Totally cool on all your reps, but definitely as you get closer to fatigue, as long as we're biasing elbow flexion, that's all good jazz there. You just want to have hard quality sets that's going to drive this stimulus. Like we mentioned before, it's very hard to overtrain at a point where we're actually digging ourselves in a hole.
Even intermediate lifters, it's really hard to truly get to that point, guys. And I think it causes people to stop short of failure. Now, where is that line? I think it's in the way Jack and I coach, and we coach Jack Delaney in general, is just this rhythmic flow of a session. Everything needs to kind of build and crescendo. So any one exercise, you're not trying to bury yourself so much that the next one is significantly hindered. But at the same time, like Jack said, you do need to create mechanical tension on the muscle, make sure that muscle is being loaded. It's taking a failure so the fibers are getting recruited. And it's, as you do it more and more, you'll find that flow where it's your reps look pretty consistent near failure. And at that point, you just know that was a good quality set. You don't need to do tons and tons of shit past failure. There's some times you might want to do that, but as long as you're not doing that chronically in every set of every exercise, the chances of you going too far are slim. The stimulus fatigue ratio is another big concept you guys might have heard about. So basically there's perfect stimulus to fatigue ratio. If you do this exercise, it's too much fatigue to the stimulus, yada, yada. Jack, what are your thoughts on that?
I feel like it's finding that Goldilocks zone, kind of like you mentioned with having the flow, the rhythm within the workout. I always preach to clients I work with that it's stacking these good days, these good exercises, one on top of the other to reach the reward. And there is some sort of stimulus fatigue, and I feel like this is more pertaining to your certain scenarios where if it's more of a growth phase or prep, what's the stimulus fatigue ratio on some motions you may be doing, definitely the tail end of a prep, maybe going something a bit more external bracing, so maybe a free weight dip to a machine dip. That stimulus fatigue ratio might be more optimal there, keeping more mechanical tension on our triceps, anterior delt, chest on the machine dip versus having to use more stability muscles on the weighted dip. Could be a little bit of difference there. Now I'd kind of go again, person dependent on that.
No, that's a great point. I think it comes down to what is the goal of the phase you're in, and sometimes honestly, when you're training, the goal might be to generate some fatigue, you're trying to build some mental resiliency or do some functional overreaching, like Jack said. It's this Goldilocks zone, and you can't just be scared to train certain moves because of the stimulus fatigue ratio. Sure, if you do a bent over barbell row, you accumulate a little bit more axial fatigue. Got it. I hate that term. But then that's why guys have underdeveloped erectors. And at the end of a lot of our back days like that, people do something like that when maybe the lats are already fatigued. So now you don't need as much load to push a little bit less stress on the low back, but you're still getting some sort of stimulus. Like, it's all about proper, I think, program design too, and kind of managing like overall global stressors, not just in the session, but across the program, yada, yada. Fatigue and autoregulation. So like utilizing things like HRV, RPE, etc. to like manage and monitor fatigue. Jack, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, obviously, I have a lot of clients that do that, but it's more of a, I'd go off more how you feel versus what the app's telling you, right? So if you wake up one morning and your HRV is low, or it says, oh my gosh, I got poor sleep, but subjectively you feel great, I'd go at training as is then. I would progress like a normal day that way. I won't let that number, I'm guilty of this too. I used to let that number like, oh man, I only got, this says my recovery was this. That means I shouldn't go as hard. Well, no, go how you feel, right? And in the sense of if you're feeling low under the weather, something where you actually feel a little sick, maybe that's where you ought to regulate, kind of match last week, not progressing. Again, it's living to see another day and stacking those good days.
Yeah, I love that, guys. That's great. Like, honestly, it's only these data points are only as good as they're applied within the context, right? Like, I couldn't have said it any better myself. Like, these data points are just data. It is up to you and the coach to interpret them and understand what they mean. A good coach is good at interpreting these trends and making adjustments, but you also can't be a slave to the data, right? So we do utilize HRV, and there's all kinds of ways to monitor like overall fatigue and recovery. Just don't let it dictate your workout too much unless you identify that's a trend you need to watch out for. And functional overreaching like versus overtraining. I think a lot of people don't quite understand that there's a time to like push that over the edge or in order to super compensate, right? So what are your thoughts on like finding that line of like how much is just enough versus too much?
Yeah, I think that's kind of find that Goldilocks zone, right? Finding it's individualized towards the individual. I don't think there's a magic number. 3 sets of 10 to 15 is what you got to do for this because it's an accessory work. I think you got to work with the individual, learn from the individual, and see where you can add. Again, I'll use myself an example here. One of my leg and muscle groups, my delts. We found that we were doing 6-8 sets across the week there of direct delt work. We added in some intensifiers. Obviously, it's going to keep a little bit more fatigue, more of that metabolite fatigue, so to speak. But I was able to recover from that and grow at a great rate. So I feel like, again, it's person dependent, context dependent, and you'll learn with the individual you're working with.
No, absolutely. It's like I said, the famous Lee Haney quote, stimulate, don't annihilate. You need to know what it's going to take to stimulate the muscle you need to grow in every person. And generally muscles grow, kind of consistent. We can somewhat predict what drives it, mechanical tension, right? But the context of a person's plan and like their body and what you learn across the different phases you do with somebody, you might understand like, okay, this is when we need to intentionally push just a little more, or we're building up to this point. We know that at this point it won't be sustainable long term, and then we go ahead and pull back. And that kind of brings up the concept of deloads, right? And deloading is something some people are huge proponents of. They deload every like 4 to 6 weeks. And Jack, what are our thoughts on deloading and specifically like how to manage fatigue with deloading?
I couldn't tell last time I've done like a legitimate deload within like a session that way. Every time I'm in here, it's for a purpose and a reason, right? And that's to grow towards my goals. But I could see it being a case where coming back, I feel like it's deloading / intro phase, acclimation phases can kind of line up in the sense that you're working up to that working volume you want to get back to. So if you're coming back from a vacation or you're over fatigued, so to speak, maybe kind of take a couple of days off is what I typically recommend rather than just like something, get blood flow.
If you're in the gym, you're driving some fatigue. So if you've already identified that you're too fatigued to train hard, I don't think that session is going to be productive really at all. And sure, there's like some of that active recovery, which I think is already a very ironic term. A lot of like CrossFit athletes and people who just like love being in the gym use that as reasons to stay in the gym, and it creates this whole cascade of true chronic fatigue accumulation. That is when I do see that become too much. Like how many bodybuilders have ever had rhabdo, but versus something like a CrossFitter, like there is a point when it is too much and deload is needed, and in that case, just get your ass out of the gym. Like, don't go to the gym and just be okay, just like recovering and hanging out. We do a lot more reactive deloading, unless of course we can strategically plan that, like, there's a certain show day we're pushing up to something, or there's a trip or something coming up, you're not gonna be able to train for a full week. I always like to say life will take a deload kind of when you need it. So train hard, and that's why we don't recommend like redlining all the time. Again, find that Goldilocks zone. Where can you train hard consistently and productively without out, always hitting just above the red line and then right back down. Like some models of volume accumulation be like real low, almost unproductive, and then very quickly crescendo up to a overreaching standpoint and then have to deload just because they overreached right away. They didn't spend any time in this like Goldilocks zone, right? Like, you know, this feeling good state of training hard, productively, recovery, like that whole cascade. All right, that's the biggest issue we see when it comes to programming. We'll talk about that on another episode. And I know we're just over time here, so we'll wrap this up. But quickly, like managing fatigue, aside from deloading, Jack, what are the big things you need to focus on to actually manage fatigue if it's an issue?
It's, again, multifaceted, right? Make sure you get that proper sleep, proper nutrition, the right foods, not just carbs and proteins, but the right foods that actually fuel you that way. And make sure you're managing everything else, your sleep, your step count, all that's in a good spot there too. Nothing's random, everything has a purpose behind it, so treat it as such with intention.
Fatigue, again, managing fatigue comes down to like managing your global stressors in your day, like this whole allostatic load, however you want to conceptualize it, right? Like there's this fatigue amount, and training is likely not the only driver unless you're truly obsessive with it. It's probably a combination of everything. So the stuff that makes you a healthy, happy human is going to be the stuff that also helps you manage your fatigue. All right, that's it for this episode, guys. Remember, you're not as fragile as you think, right? You might be a little tired, but you're probably not broken. As long as you have this other stuff in place, train hard, train productively. We'll see you on the next episode of the Jack Deline, our 10 Minutes or Less.